What's your long-term 10 to 15 year expectation?
10-year will be 100x and 15 will probably be 1,000.
1,000
Yep.
in today's purchasing power? Like today's dollar
Yes.
purchasing power?
Yeah, and the market cap of Bitcoin is going to go through the roof. Then Bitcoin would be $14 billion a coin. And I say that with a straight face thinking, well, that seems fair. There's going to be a demonetization of the real estate sector. There's going to be a demonetization of the stock market, but that's going to put upward pressure on the price of Bitcoin.
Yo, welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. I'm here with Peter Dunworth. Peter Dunworth, I apologize, is the founder of the Bitcoin Advisor, and he also has incredible takes on Bitcoin, genius takes on Bitcoin, incredibly bullish takes on Bitcoin. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining me, man. How you doing?
You know what? Life is beautiful. It's great to be with you.
Life is beautiful. Every day you live, you know, is a countless blessing, and every day we're living through essentially this kind of revolutionary viral takeover of the world by Bitcoin, and there's no dull day, there's no dull week, and it feels like so many things are happening so fast. One of the things that I've been tweeting about or posting about over the last couple of weeks, Peter, has been the fact that this cycle has been the most bullish cycle from a news perspective, like the news of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, the news of a pro-Bitcoin administration here in the US, the repeal of SAB 121, the freedom of Ross. I've been in Bitcoin 9 years now. I've never seen a cycle as bullish as this cycle. But from a price action perspective, it's been lackluster. I think it's underperformed to a lot of people's expectations. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think, Bitcoin is not at 120, 130, 150K by now? Like a lot of us were expecting, especially compared to the previous cycles, man. So do you buy into this idea of the diminishing returns? What's your take, Peter?
I think the key comment or word you said there was expectations. And the gap between reality and expectations usually leads to disappointment. So it's really good to tone down those expectations. But I, like you, am a little bit miffed about the fact that we have seen the most bullish news cycle. I think this is for the most important thing that I can garner out of everything that's happening right now is that left tail event of Bitcoin going to zero has now been taken off the table. And now is the best time on a risk adjusted basis to be buying Bitcoin. And I look at that and think, well, this is just to the information asymmetry. Information is not evenly distributed across the globe right now, because understanding that, I look at that and think, well, now is the time to be piling into it. So we should see a run on that. But the main event that's happening at the moment on the global scale is, there's geopolitics happening across the globe with a number of different war zones that sort of need to be addressed. And then you've got a resetting of the financial table globally with the US and the tariffs, and what's happening on a macro level with the United States, I think, is basically putting everything on the back burner. And what I find really interesting about what's happening now is with all of the chaos that's happening across the US, particularly with the tariffs, is that this is creating wild volatility in the traditional financial markets. But what's really interesting, being a Bitcoiner, is that this is just another day in paradise, watching the markets go up and down relative to Bitcoin. And one of the things that's really interesting, I find, is that clients who hold Bitcoin, when this type of thing is happening in traditional financial markets, all of a sudden find themselves inoculated from the fear and the FUD that is created in traditional markets when there is this move. But to sort of put a bow on that, I'm a little bewildered that we haven't seen the price run happen. And this is where I don't think the cycles are over yet. And most importantly, I still think there is more upside in front of us than behind us. So I think it's just a matter of being patient, and we're going to watch all of this, macroeconomic news roll over us. And then once that's sort of put behind us, basically the money printer go burr and we can get on with it.
So, okay, so a lot to unpack there. You still think that Bitcoin's best days are in front of it, not behind it. I want to unpack that. So I was actually and I know I'm nitpicking the dates, okay, but I'm just going to use the 4-year kind of time scale because we think of it of a 4-year cycle as Bitcoiners, right? Their halvings are roughly every 4 years. If you go back 4 years from now and you take a look at the price appreciation from exactly 4 years from now, it's roughly 40%. For Bitcoin, 4 years, 40% is for the stock move great. And we're like, okay, this is a good return. But for Bitcoin terms, that's quite depressing. Now, the caveat to that is if you move it to 5 years, it's actually 1,000% return. And if you move it to 3 years, again, the bottom of the bear market, it's been a much better return. But, I think all of us were kind of expecting, kind of, higher price appreciation, especially this is, and if you look at Bitcoin's historical performance, 3 years after the halving tends to be, or sorry, I apologize. The year after the halving tends to be the most explosive year. So, I mean, like you were mentioning, like just like the kind of global events. Do you believe that, and you still believe that you said that the cycles are intact? Like, so are you expecting a great 2025? And if you are, what's your reasonings behind that?
I am expecting a really good 2025, but there's a macro overhang and a political overhang that needs to be overcome first. And this is where the caveat I have on a great 2025 is we could see this cycle bleed into first or maybe even second quarter next year, because what we're seeing is what we're living through right now is literally a seismic event that has implications for the next 50 to 100 years of global economic trade, where Trump's trying to reset the table. And this sort of thing doesn't happen. It's like trying to turn the Titanic with a paddle pop stick, a little wooden stick. It's just going to take a long time to turn. And this is where my expectations on this is this could see us pushed out for the next 6 months on sort of negative and choppy markets. But what I look at as probably the number one key driver for this market is going to be the liquidity spigot needs to open. And the number one objective, I believe, of Trump is ensuring that he wins the midterm so that he continue on for the next 2 years trying to achieve his mandate and his, what he was elected to do. Given that and working back from there, if you look at, the fact that you're going to have the midterms in October, November next year, he's going to need roughly 12 months of really good economic performance to run into that so that he has the highest chance of winning. And I look at that and think, well, working back from there, we're going to see choppy markets possibly up until October this year, and then he's going to let that run, maybe even December. So he's got 9 months into it. So I think that's the biggest consideration for the market at the moment. And the reason why I say that is as larger and larger pools of capital come to Bitcoin, they move a lot slower, and it takes a lot more capital to move the market. So it's kind of like stretching the cycle a little bit. And this is where I think the cycles are still intact. I think all of the big money that's coming to Bitcoin is still fundamentally going to suffer the same fate that all Bitcoiners have, of that fear of missing out, and they will allocate accordingly. It's just going to take them a little longer.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And I by the way, you're not the first person I've heard talk about this extended cycle. I tend to agree. This is a completely uncharted territories. I mean, what's happening with the whole tariffs. Also, not to mention too, the Fed's current stance right now with the rates are so high. It's still a QT environment. We're slowly starting to see the shift of that. A lot of people are expecting that we're going to be back in a QE environment or close to it, like in kind of like the summer months. But yeah, I mean, but isn't that a little bit depressing, Peter? Because it's like, in a way, Bitcoin was born with this idea of an alternative to central banking, alternative to money printing, an alternative to the traditional system. And here we are as Bitcoiners, like cheering the U.S. government and cheering central banks, cheering the policy of central banks so that number go up.
That's one way of looking at it, but that's quite a defeatist attitude, I think, to looking at this. And my alternative view on this is I'm cheering that on because I know that Bitcoin's stronger than the central bank. So as long as the central bank adopts it, I know Bitcoin's going to crush it. But if the central bank's fighting Bitcoin, then there's more chance that they win. But when they adopt it, I'm absolutely cheering this on because then it will destruct, like it will absolutely eviscerate that structure from within. So I think it's not a mutually exclusive comment to say you can cheer on Bitcoin and be pro anti-establishment and the adoption of the central bank. So I maybe take a different view and think everything's good for Bitcoin. It's the hardest, most resilient thing we've ever seen, and I think it's far more resilient than the central bank. So if they adopt it, it's ultimately their own peril. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. So they may as well get on board, adopt it sooner than everyone else, and then have an advantage like we've seen Bukele down in El Salvador.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess the way that I was framing that, Peter, was like, it isn't it a little bit sad or going away from the ethos that uh we're now essentially cheering the policy of central banks in regards to Bitcoin, rather than before it was more kind of like this hostile stance, or better said, like, we don't need central banks. Bitcoin could win regardless of central banks, or Bitcoin price could go up regardless of central bank policy. Isn't that kind of, hasn't the community did a little bit of a 180 there?
Maybe on the surface, but if you look at the second order consequences, then I think we're still on the same team. We're still cheering for the same outcome. And I look at it and think this is the moment in the matrix where Anderson basically gets consumed by the Agent Smith, where he goes inside of him, and then Keanu Reeves starts turning into the agent, and we think, oh no, we're dead. And this is the moment where most cypherpunk Bitcoiners are like, why are we cheering this on? Why is this happening? And getting hysterical about it. And what we don't realize is that we're a split second away from Neo basically blasting Agent Smith out of his body and eviscerating it. So that's the second order consequence that happens when the central banks adopt it. So I don't think we fight it. I think the way is through.
Gotcha. Okay, that analogy, like, you could have explained it, but without that analogy, I don't think I would have been able to conceptualize it. So that was because in my head I was running through it and then understanding what you were saying, and I think that's spot on, and that makes sense. So within the matrix, okay, I get it. Very, very good point. So let's talk about just all the things that have happened essentially in the last year, which have been crazy, right? This recent election in the United States, we have the first pro Bitcoin president in the White House. You have the election of Donald Trump. You had the end of Operation Choke Point 2.0. Do you think though? Do you think that's a big deal from a number go up perspective, and then from a Bitcoin business perspective?
Both of those things cannot be understated. The first superpower to endorse Bitcoin is a major event. That to me tells us everything that we need to know, that Bitcoin no longer has a fear for its life moment. I don't think it could ever go to zero, but now we have government endorsement. Whether or not we like it or not is another thing. But the other thing to your second point there is the most important thing is that this is now a green light for businesses to build on Bitcoin. And that is the most important thing that I see, because I can tell you as a Bitcoin business, we've been hamstrung by the second order consequences of what the regulators in the US have mandated and dictated. This Operation Choke Point 2.0, not only is it bad in the US, it's arguably worse in Australia by reach. So to have an administration that's now supportive of Bitcoin businesses and building and becoming the Bitcoin capital of the world, it is a huge 180-degree turn that enables entrepreneurs to basically flock to the US to build these things out. So I actually think we're in a golden age of Bitcoin that we've never seen before.
Gotcha. No, and I echo that. It's been such a night and day shift, compared to where I felt. Again, I'm based out of the US, where we were 6 months ago. Me and my partner were seriously considering essentially leaving the United States because of just the hostile regulatory environment, the attack on self-custody. And now it's, what you said, like, essentially the most powerful government on the face of the planet, most powerful country economically, militarily, has basically said, you know what, Bitcoin is a strategic asset. And then, of course, not to mention, the likes of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, basically giving the rubber stamp of approval as well. So yeah, I completely agree. Now, you were saying something earlier, and I kind of wanted to double back to that, which I thought was really interesting. You said that Bitcoin's best days are ahead of it. What did you mean by that?
I think on many levels, Bitcoin has been a nascent technology, and it's been a very small financial network to date. And what I look at, and my understanding of the existing financial system that we've got, the current price structure, the network itself, I look at Bitcoin and think the best days are in front of it from many different facets. You look at, just from a price appreciation perspective, I actually think we've got more returns in front of us than behind us. Now, that might be a 20, 30-year period, but, it's only been in existence for 16 years or so, which means the next 30 years, we're going to get all of that and more by way of return. I look at the network building out. I look at the hash rate on the network, basically going through a zeta hash. All of the metrics that you can measure on the network are improving, and this is to the point we talked about earlier. The sort of disconnect that we have of expectation v reality when it comes to price. We often, I think, get bogged down in looking at the price because it sort of affects mood and affects a whole lot of things, particularly interest in Bitcoin. But every metric in Bitcoin is going the right way. And I look at that and think, this is a global network that is being built out for 8 billion people. And maybe 10 million, maybe at the very best, probably more like 1 million people on Earth actually understand what this thing is and are living on a Bitcoin standard. Even that, I think it's too much. But all of a sudden, this network is, all the metrics are going the right way. Hash rate, nodes, you name it. And what we'll see, I think, in the next sort of 12 to 24 months, we're going to see a really sharp price appreciation. And this is the problem with Bitcoin, that it typically lulls you to sleep and bores you to death. And then all of a sudden there's a huge jump in price. And now everyone's back on Bitcoin buying at the top. And, it's the problem that we're all going to face forever.
Yeah, 100%. It is interesting, the whole FOMO aspect of it, right? And it's I think the thing that grinds people down the most is the fact that you can spend months like just essentially going sideways. Things get boring. People start to question, not anymore because I've been here a couple cycles, but people start to question, like, is this thing going to ever go up again? It's not done again. I think it's matured, so it's come so far that you can't say it's going. I highly doubt it's ever going to go away. But it gets boring. People start looking into more speculative assets, and they get wrecked, and they end up with less Bitcoin than they could have had, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, you wake up one day, and then thing just rips. But let's talk about essentially the idea of diminishing returns. Let's talk about the idea of what type of upside, and your business focuses on, it's the Bitcoin advisor. It's in the name. It's self-explanatory, right?
Yeah.
What type of, what type of upside, two-part question. What type of upside are you expecting in the near term, 2025, 2026? What are your expectations? I know you said earlier expectations are bad, but I'm giving you that question anyway.
I think it's realistic to think we see a 3 to 10x in price from here over the next 18 months. I don't think that would be out of the realm of possibility. So that would look something like a $240,000 to $800,000 Bitcoin. And, if it goes to 800,000, it'll be a Pico top where it literally just touches it, and then it's going to come down as quick as it went up. I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. A 3x from here is, I think, more than achievable, particularly if we have liquidity provided that we expect. And then once all of these, once all of the chaos is behind us, there really is nothing else to invest in. And this is where one of the key outcomes I look at from all of this, trade war chaos that's happening at the moment is that is introducing the world, traditional finance, to the volatility of Bitcoin. Effectively, they're getting Bitcoin volatility for TradFi returns. And this is where we'll see a migration to Bitcoin. So I think too long didn't read, 3 to 10x is where my head's at.
Yo, I want to tell you about the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. I'm talking about bitcoinwell.com. What makes bitcoinwell.com different is that it's a completely non-custodial platform, meaning as soon as you buy Bitcoin and the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. And that perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state. Support Bitcoin on-ramps that are self-custody by default. To get started, go to bitcoinwell.com today. It takes 2 to 5 minutes to sign up, and bada bing, bada boom, you're ready to buy Bitcoin.
What's your long-term 10 to 15 year expectation?
10-year will be 100x, and 15 will probably be 1,000.
1,000? How? But from a market, that's impossible. From a market cap, 1,000 in today's purchasing power, like today's dollar purchasing power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know exactly where your head's going to, which is, hang on a second, that represents $2,000 trillion, and there's only $1,000 trillion of value in the world.
Yeah, that's exactly where my head's at.
Yep. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of what this is. So, or an example of the impossible. So if you look at in the 1850s, just let me break down where we are today in oil production terms. In oil production terms today, we produce roughly 100 million barrels of oil at a clip of, 2 months ago, it was $80 a barrel. Now it's $60 a barrel. So it's $6 billion a day. In the 1850s, they only produced 30,000 barrels of oil in the entire year. Now we do 100 million barrels a day. And so if I said to you, oh, we're going to have 100 million barrels of oil produced in a day in the 1850s, they would have said it's impossible, that you can't do it. There's not enough, there's not enough land mass on Earth to produce that. But as technology got better, they could go deeper. They could, build more efficient pumps, more efficient drills, and all of a sudden now we rely on oil for everything. I look at this and think a lot of people are misunderstanding that Bitcoin is a need, not a want. And other than air, water, food, shelter, Bitcoin is the next most important thing that a human can have. And there are maybe 1 million people in the world who feel like that right now. But over the next 15 years, 8 billion people on Earth are going to figure that out. And so what can happen is, and this is where, if you have a look at how market caps are calculated, you look at the most recent price and you multiply that by the number of units available in that market. And in short, the market cap is downstream of the current price, and price is determined at the margin. My expectation is, because we're sitting on basically a fractionalized banking system that is effectively built on debt, we need to recapitalize our society so that we're sitting on more equity than debt. Now, the only way to do that with no downstream consequences for society is to put all of that capital into Bitcoin. And what happens here, and this is the only asset that can really get an increasing return on scale rather than a diminishing return of scale, is that $1 into Bitcoin produces a 2 to 10 to 100x return as far as total equity goes for the Bitcoin market cap. If you put $1 into property or $1 into shares, you might get a 10% or a 15% return if you're lucky. So you're getting a 10x return by putting equity or capital into Bitcoin. And so what I look at, and this is, say diagrammatically, what we're looking at is the current system that we're working in is basically a tiny little bit of equity with a huge triangle of debt sitting above it, which is very, very unstable. My expectation is that Bitcoin is not only the only asset that can fill that void to stabilize it, but it's the best asset from a society perspective, because there's no impact on cost of living pressures, inflation, and housing. The fact that you can't live in a Bitcoin is the very reason why they're going to choose this asset to recapitalize the world. And so in TradFi, we're working on a under-collateralized system. Basically, you've got that upside down triangle. In Bitcoin, you've got an over-collateralized system. So you've got to have more equity than there is debt in the system by very definition of it. We're going to move to a more stable system. And you say, oh, well, Peter, there's still $2,000 trillion of equity in Bitcoin versus $1,000 trillion in everything else. How does that work? And it's going to work for two reasons. Firstly, people are going to value the future purchasing power of their Bitcoin more than they value their current purchasing power. So you look at Jeff Bezos as a perfect example, or Elon Musk. Elon Musk, the richest bloke in the world, doesn't even have a home. He prefers his future valuing purchase power than his current. And this is where everyone, I believe, is going to figure out, well, if we're improving society and getting better through time, it's going to be beneficial for me to save my Bitcoin and buy at a later point in time. And there's going to be more people who do that than don't do it. And this is how you can store more value in Bitcoin than any other asset.
Yeah, I mean, it's now that you're breaking it down, it's incredibly obvious. Like, and I'm going to give my own personal example, right? So I live in Miami. It's pretty like up there in terms of cost of living, in just general cities worldwide. I'm happy renting, like super happy renting. Like it just makes like the way that I see it on a Bitcoin standard is essentially like it's benefiting me. And even let's say I bought the property and I rented out the property, it wouldn't give me that type of return, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do I essentially spend as little Bitcoin as possible today, while maintaining a certain type of lifestyle? Obviously, it's not real estate, right? Because before,
No.
I think what fiat has done is essentially created, which is absurd, right? Real estate, this like investment vehicle. But if you compare it to Bitcoin, you have to pay maintenance, you have to pay property tax, you have to deal with tenants. And if you compare that with Bitcoin, it's like, okay, no tenants, no property tax yet, no maintenance. I mean, to an extent, so you can make an argument there, but significantly less maintenance than real estate. And what you're making the argument for, and I'm connecting the dots in real time, is more and more people are going to start to see what I've seen, essentially, which is just like, this makes no sense. It's like, no, a home isn't an investment. It should have never been an investment. The fiat system made it essentially forced people to become part-time investors just to maintain their purchasing power. Bitcoin fixes this. So you're making the argument that more and more people are going to come to the realization that I've come to, that I think a lot of other Bitcoiners have come to. I saw Stefan Livera making the same case about renting, right? So like, it's just like, and then you're pressured by your parents or your family, is like, buy whatever. It's like, yeah, I could, but I would have less Bitcoin and I could just rent, live the same lifestyle and have more Bitcoin. Why would I do that? Right? But to anyone who's not a Bitcoiner, you're a crazy person. You're insane, right? And you're
Correct.
basically making cases like, no, people are going to realize this and it's going to dramatically change the world. So could you elaborate? Could you keep going? Because you were on fire before I interrupted you because I was connecting the dots.
So I'm living your life too. I rent and I love it. We just sold our family home. Personally, I feel a sense of liberation. Yeah,
exactly.
Liberation that
Exactly
I don't have to deal with a property. If something goes wrong with it, we've got wonderful landlords and real estate agents who look after us and make sure it's kept. But to the point about how you can cram more equity or capital into Bitcoin versus any other asset, the other assets that we talk of are limited in scope by the amount of earnings that can afford to pay the debt on that. Whereas Bitcoin has no debt on it. So it can afford to consume all excess capital in the world. And this is where we're going to see a shift of any excess capital to yourself personally and every other Bitcoin out there who's doing it. More and more people are going to make that lifestyle decision to basically rent an asset that they can live in and effectively own, but they're just renting it to leave more capital in Bitcoin for the preservation of the Bitcoin for longer term. And this is where, to highlight a point, Jeff Bezos, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, he doesn't go out and spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year. He's very lucky if he spends maybe less than, I would have thought, 0.01% of his entire net worth. And that's because he's got a great asset in Amazon that continues to accrue value. And my point is that when 8 billion people have access to an asset that's better than Amazon, they're not going to sell it for a whim or for something that they just offhandedly want. And this is where all of a sudden, when you live on a Bitcoin standard, you get very, very focused and disciplined when it comes to spending. You have to make sure you really want that item, because the future purchasing power of Bitcoin in my head is so great that I don't want to be seen as wasteful with my Bitcoin. So this is where, once you understand that there's going to be a demonetization of the real estate sector, there's going to be a demonetization of the stock market, where we're going to see a compression of those price earnings ratios come down dramatically. They're at ludicrous levels at the moment, well above, I think it's 18, nearly 20 times PE ratios, which is just, at all-time highs. It's approaching, the the internet bubble back in 1999. And so there's going to be a compression of the PE ratios, a compression of the yields in property. The values might actually not change so much, but that's going to put upward pressure on the price of Bitcoin. And so we're going to get less and less Bitcoin trading on a daily basis, and the market cap of Bitcoin is going to go through the roof. And price is determined at the margin. So we might only have, and this is, the end conclusion I get to is, we're going to have whatever's minted on the day. At the moment, it's roughly 450 coins. And whatever the global trade is on the day is going to have to be facilitated by whatever's minted on the day, because everyone else has locked their coins up, stored it, and is not spending them. And if that were the case, we'd have, if that sum was done today and that's how we were living, then Bitcoin would be $14 billion a coin. And I say that with a straight face, thinking, well, that seems fair.
It's difficult for me to fully comprehend, but I could tell you from lived experience, I understand what it is you're saying, at least like conceptually, but it's difficult for me to, because it's such large numbers that you're just like, Peter, what are you talking about? You're talking about 1,000x. Like, shut up, man. Like, that's crazy.
I
That's
sincerely
nuts.
believe that. I think we do have 1,000x in front of us, and we're going to have it in definitely less than 20 years. And it'll probably be more like 15.
Absolutely. That's absolutely bonkers. Okay. So, yeah, incredible. What would you say to people that are looking at MicroStrategy or looking at these, or MetaPlanet, or like kind of like these levered Bitcoin plays? And it looks a little bit more attractive, at least from a return perspective. What would you say to those people? Because in a way, they are kind of right. If they would have bought MicroStrategy 4 years ago instead of Bitcoin, the volatility was higher, but technically they would have more Bitcoin today. They would just have more purchasing power. What would you say to those people?
To anyone considering it, I hope you've got a huge bag of Bitcoin first. That would be the most important thing to understand about owning MicroStrategy or MetaPlanet, is that I've got this financial theory that Bitcoin is terraforming the entire financial universe before our very eyes. And Bitcoin's the best asset that you can hold. The first order derivative of Bitcoin, so Bitcoin's a primitive, the first order derivative is your MetaPlanet and MicroStrategy, and that's the levered play on it. Then you've got the derivative of the derivative being the convertible bonds and notes, and the derivative of the derivative is the income funds that we've talked or seen and looked at, the MSTY, which is basically an income fund that generates option income based on the volatility of MicroStrategy. And I think if you don't understand Bitcoin and the primitive, which is Bitcoin, then owning MicroStrategy and MetaPlanet is not going to be good for your health, because you're not going to understand what's happening in the market when you have those wild swings up and down. If you're a Bitcoiner and want to dabble in that, hey, you do you. But on a risk-adjusted basis, long-term, I believe Bitcoin will be the best asset to hold through time. And there are going to be things that you can do with Bitcoin that you just can't do with MetaPlanet or MicroStrategy. To me, I would try and have as much of my wealth in Bitcoin as possible, and then have, if you do need to scratch that itch, have a small component in MetaPlanet and MicroStrategy. Because in the up market, it's going to be great, but the down market's going to be vicious.
Do you think that there are still down markets like moving forward? Like do you think that do you perceive that as the case? Like, like or is that kind of like like, are we still seeing 80 to 20%, 80 to 70%, swings to the downside? It seems like the volatility has definitely decreased.
We thought that last cycle too, and we saw a 78% drop. So, we say that, it's no longer dropping 80%, it's 78. Oh, well, you know what? Theoretically, yes, but then large players with money printers come in and they can buy and sell and they can whipsaw this market around. And arguably the best chart to see the future of what's going to happen with Bitcoin is having a look at that 1920s Weimar v gold chart and having a look at the volatility that gold went through in that. And I look at that and think, that's probably our next decade, because the amount of money coming to Bitcoin is going to be enormous. And the fact that people with money printers are now buying it and they can sell it and they can whip this thing around because, there's so little supply on the market is going to be really detrimental to people who aren't committed to the decision and holding on a long-term basis. But that's the beauty of Bitcoin. It teaches you to be patient, but I'm not so certain that we're going to see decreased volatility through time, because big players will be able to throw the market around much, in a way that we haven't seen before.
And okay, so this is, I love having you on, Peter. You're giving me different perspectives on all these different things. Okay, so cycles not done. The 70-80% drawdowns are not done. Bitcoin's best days ahead of us. Completely minimum 100x next 10-15 years. On the upside, 1000x. I can't comprehend that, but I believe you. And what about the where do you see the whole custody of Bitcoin evolving to? Because this has been my experience so far. Someone like me, someone who's like, to be frank, like a nerd, and like I love Bitcoin and love tinkering with these self-custody setups and all that stuff. I could, buy a cold card, and I could download Sparrow, and I could download, Electrum, and I know how to set up a multi-sig, by myself. It's not a problem. But I've been, doing this for 9 years now, and what I've noticed is that doesn't seem to be the case with everybody, especially kind of older people, and to use your reference or your analogy better, that have spent the majority of their lives in the fiat matrix. So they're used to outsourcing the personal responsibility of the custody of their wealth to a bank. The idea of self-custody is radical. And I think that the Bitcoin experiment, it requires an element of the percentage of users taking self-custody of their coins. So where do you see that moving forward? Do you see kind of more collaborative custody solutions? Like, what do you tell a high net worth individual that, they've made their money, they have their account on the Schwab account, they have their account, they have their portfolio. What do you tell them about self-custody? Like, what's your pitch?
I think self-custody comes down to maintaining optionality through time. And when you are in an ETF or not self-custodying, you're subject to the whims and regulations of whatever jurisdiction you're holding that in. And to me, I want all my clients to have maximum optionality through time and maximum peace of mind. And so what we do with self-custody is a trade-off. It's not a pure play, like, say, you would have your setup, but it is a way to get high net worth clients to put more capital into this structure or into self-custody Bitcoin than they would otherwise feel comfortable with. And this is where, for me, I think the future is self-custody Bitcoin, because if you self-custody Bitcoin, you are actually going to broaden your options dramatically through time. And let me give you a big example of what's coming down the pike. The repeal of SAB 121 is arguably the biggest thing that I've seen in the last 18 months with respect to Bitcoin and the viability of it from a banking perspective. What's the big deal of that? It means that banks can custody it. And I know this is going to sound counterclaim to what we're trying to achieve with more self-custody, but if the banks will have lending options in the very near future. And it's my conjecture that banks across the globe, because this is a globally ubiquitous asset, will compete for your Bitcoin as collateral for loans. And so I believe we are going to have banks somewhere in the world at some point in time actually paying you as a Bitcoiner to borrow money from them. Now, that option is only available if you self-custody that Bitcoin and can then send said Bitcoin to them. But if you're holding a MicroStrategy, a MetaPlanet, or an ETF, you're subject and bound to the rules of the margin lending in that jurisdiction. And margin lending, last time I checked, is running at an interest rate on margin loans of roughly between 7 to 10%. Now, if you self-custody your Bitcoin, you'll be able to pretty soon go to Japan and go to a retail bank there and say, hey, you've got a rate at 1.5% from the central bank. Can you give us a loan at 2%? And there'll be hundreds of banks in Japan who'll say, we'll give you that rate at 2%. Now, all of a sudden, you've created a 6 to 8% arbitrage on the cost of your capital. And if you look at cost of capital being arguably the most important thing when it comes to your financial performance through time, look at Michael Saylor's cost of capital, what he's been able to achieve with a 0% cost of capital. The other interesting thing over the last 20 years with a business that was successful by outcompeting people on a cost of capital was Amazon. And we've seen how that's done over the last 20 years. It's been arguably one of, if not the best performing stock. So I think if you want to maintain maximum optionality for yourself moving forward, peace of mind, security, it's incumbent upon you to get good at self-custody.
Gotcha. Interesting. Very, very good. Okay. So not your keys, not your cheese. It limits you because of the fact that you can't vote with your feet. You can't go to more favorable jurisdictions. You're essentially confined to your jurisdiction and the laws to it. You're really only empowered with Bitcoin and self-custody. Very, very interesting. Now, Peter, you do have clients, you do have customers, you're running the Bitcoin advisor. Is there a philosophical component to kind of Bitcoin adoption among your clients?
I definitely see that. We get to see all spectrum from OG Bitcoiners all the way through to people starting out on that journey. And without wanting to sound too woo-woo, I think Bitcoin is almost a spiritual journey that people go through. It's definitely a hero's journey, and you find out a lot about yourself. And what we get to see is Bitcoin reveals character, not only in the good times, but in the bad times. And that's really where you find out a lot about yourself. Those 80% drawdowns, I hope those 80% drawdowns continue, because it actually helps all of the newbies to Bitcoin actually, find out about, themselves on a deeper level. But there is definitely a spiritual component to it. And I think Bitcoin is the world's greatest tool for ascending the Maslow's needs hierarchy as quickly as possible. And this is something that I think 8 billion people are going to be interested in, but maybe only 1 million or 10 million people at the moment really understand.
Absolutely. What's your take on the intergenerational wealth transfer currently underway? Like, are younger beneficiaries more open to Bitcoin than their parents?
100%. But something has changed in the last 6 months. And I can tell you that the majority of our clients are baby boomers who are sitting on big swathes of property, like millions, if not tens of millions of dollars of property. And rather than saying, hey, I want more property and add to this, they're looking around thinking they understand the problem is that the next generation doesn't have the capability, whether it's servicing or the assets required to put up as collateral, to buy their properties from them. And so on a microcosm, most families are looking at their children, who still might be living with them at the age of 25 or 30, thinking, these kids can't afford to buy what I've got. Why on earth am I holding it? So there's a seismic shift happening where baby boomers are realizing, hey, I'm in the wrong asset class. What's the asset class that the kids are going to want to hold? And so what I'm actually more curious about is baby boomers who are selling off millions of dollars of property at a time to put the whole thing into Bitcoin, like 20% of their net equity. It's bizarre, but that's happening. And ironically, the younger generation is far more amenable to that sort of thing. But it's also now starting to seep through to the boomers. So I'm excited at that thought.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for sharing that with me. That's absolutely crazy. And you know what's interesting too is in just not be specific, but in some high net worth individuals around me, I that are older kind of generation, I've seen that phenomenon as well, and it's quite interesting how they're essentially liquidating some of their vacation homes and putting some of that into Bitcoin. I find that very, very fascinating, because it's kind of like that it's a complete change in tune to how they've been operating, because I think people realize what I was talking to you about earlier, and it's such a tough pill to swallow, which is like, why am I owning this where I could be renting this and I could have more Bitcoin? And then let's say I do want to buy something for whatever reason, 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line, I'm going to be able to buy a lot more if I just have more Bitcoin, right? So
Yeah.
it's a crazy, crazy aspect of it. Now, let me ask you something else. Do you see like, do you see like, have you seen people that perhaps they heard about Bitcoin, they've dabbled a little bit in Bitcoin? Have you seen with your clients essentially how they've changed their perspective on wealth preservation? Like, perhaps in the beginning they were, okay, let me just use this. I'll hit up the guys over at Bitcoin Advisor. They'll kind of walk me through the first process. Have you seen them by them holding Bitcoin? The whole saying, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. You're saying that Bitcoin's a spiritual journey. I completely agree with you, by the way. Have you seen them change their perspective on wealth preservation ever since they've taken the orange pill? And if so, how?
Twofold to that. Firstly is it does change them, and they realize, oh, this is something I want to own because it's either easier or better than what the alternative is. And I think we both agree that that is, without a shadow of a doubt, hands down, what we both believe and are living examples of. But what I find really curious is, and this is a stat that is mind-blowing to me, and it's probably gotten better since we last did it. But 6 months ago, we looked at our clients' Bitcoin balances of working with us. And in the first 12 months, on average, our average client increases their balance by 51%.
Oh, wow. In Bitcoin.
Yeah, in Bitcoin. And what are the drivers of that? I think it's an education piece where they understand. I think, to Gigi's comment, the more you know, the more you buy. They dip their toe in, they get a little bit, they're like, oh, this actually isn't as scary as I thought it was. It's a lot better than I thought it was. All of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that I had about this asset class has been totally stripped away. And one thing that the Bitcoin Advisor we try and do is remove the risk of holding Bitcoin or self-custodying Bitcoin. So if you can remove that risk, then the only thing you need to deal with is volatility. And to solve volatility, it's a duration problem. You just need to hold it for longer. So I look at that and think, once people are educated on this, it's just a one-way valve. It's like literally a one-way ratchet. People put money in and they just keep putting money into it and build their stack up because they realize that on a comparative basis, this is the asset that they want to hold long-term. And some really interesting things that we're working on bringing to market is from an estate planning perspective and sharing generational wealth with future generations is the time locking component to Bitcoin. the fun thing about this is the only asset on earth that is impervious to any concerns, any government mandate, legal decree, or court order with respect to the transfer of that asset. Because it's cryptographically bound, there's none of those things can influence when that time lock can open up. And this is where, from an estate planning perspective, Bitcoin is a super tool for that.
Need liquidity without having to sell your Bitcoin? For more than 6 years now, Ledn has been the trusted choice for Bitcoin-backed lending with transparency, security, and trust at their core. I absolutely love these guys, and I personally have not only an account with them, but also a loan. And some of the key features that I love about Ledn is the fact that there are no monthly payments. You pay at the end of the term. You also have the ability to roll over the loan as well, and you can pay it back whenever you want. Essentially, what they do is that they help their clients unlock the liquidity of their BTC, allowing you to hodl while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. They've been battle tested with their focus on transparency, security, and trust, allowing them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn more about what your BTC can do for you. Check out ledn.io today.
The time lock, I've spoken to people about this where they're like, how do I pass it on to my kids? But, I don't want to make sure they blow through it. I'm like, time lock. Yeah. And it blows their mind. They're like, but what if you just want to end it sooner? I'm like, no, you literally cannot. Like, once you sign up to that, it is what it is. You're committed, right? For that, 5, 10 year, 20-year time scale. And it just blows their mind. And I could tell the more that they get used to the idea, the more that they get used to the all these concepts, the more comfortable, the more they're incentivized to essentially look at Bitcoin and be like, okay, this is probably a good idea. Now, I do want to ask you this question, Peter, which is, what are some tax advantages that, or tax strategies that you would recommend to your clients that perhaps most people that don't have your experience or your background don't see?
Would it be fair to say that your audience is predominantly US?
Yes. I mean, no,
Yeah.
that's no. So I would say about half is US, but we have a lot of people in Canada and the United Kingdom and Australia. So basically the English speaking countries.
Let me talk to that then. Australia and New Zealand are a special carve out, but the rest of the countries have got estate taxes, death duties, whatever you want to call it. And I look at this and think, if we're looking at the life cycle of investment for Bitcoin, not only do you need to prepare for your life, but you need to prepare for your kids' inheritance as well. And I look at the lowest hanging piece of fruit in that whole tax system as being avoiding the estate taxes. And in the US, it's relatively simple to avoid. You can avoid, and let me frame it this way. If you don't have your Bitcoin set up in a structure that avoids
avoid
or removes
it
estate taxes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Avoid it legally using the law
Correct.
to avoid it. Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
We're not doing anything illegal here. All of these are tax structures that are basically bread and butter for lawyers, attorneys across the country. But if you can remove the obligation to pay estate taxes because you can put it in this structure versus that structure, I dare say it's incumbent upon you, for your children's benefit or your people you're leaving your Bitcoin to do that. And I look at this and think, and this is where Bitcoin has sort of really grasped the gravity of this. If I told you I could increase your stack by 66%, is that something you would want to do?
Absolutely. Yes, of course.
And so by avoiding that 40% death duty and legally doing it, you are going to be leaving 66% more Bitcoin to your loved ones. And it's really just a choice of what structure you want to hold that in. And now what's really important when you sort of dig down the layers is different countries have different structures to help you achieve that outcome. In the US, it's typically an irrevocable trust or an offshore trust. And then you can work down the layers as to what are some of the, I guess, the tools that you can use within that structure to then avoid the capital gains tax ongoing through time. And this is where in the US, you have arguably some of the best tax rules when it comes to building wealth through time with very limited tax on it. And if if you're paying large amounts of tax in the US, I dare say you're getting very poor quality advice, and you need to speak to some of the guys we work with are just absolutely phenomenal because one of the other things that I think is just a major free kick when it comes to being a US resident is life insurance is tax free. And not only is life insurance tax free, you can borrow from that life insurance policy through time.
Wow. Okay.
So not only do you get to have all those gains tax free through time, while you're still alive, you can actually borrow from that insurance policy. Now, these are the things that are available that I think most Bitcoiners aren't aware of. But if I told you that you could avoid estate taxes to the tune of 40%, if you could have capital gains tax-free Bitcoin through time by putting it in certain structures, all of a sudden, this is how you actually compound wealth through time without having to pay, what we call stupid tax along the way because you don't know what you don't know.
That's first of all, it's fascinating, and this is where you guys come in at the BTC Advisor. Could you break down? We're getting to the top of the hour. Could you essentially break down the services that you guys offer? So essentially, I had it pulled up. I don't know what happened. Okay, so could you break down the services that you guys provide? And then my initial question to this is, I know that you guys do charge a fee on a yearly basis, and my question to you is, why should Bitcoiners pay that fee if they don't have to pay that fee if they just self-custody it by themselves? That's my question number one. And question number two, what are the benefits and services that you guys offer for people willing to pay that said fee?
I think that is a really good point, the first question. Why would Bitcoiners pay it? We want to work with people who think that our service is really valuable and they're happy to pay our fee. The Bitcoin community's been so incredibly generous to me. I want to give back in any way, shape, or form that I can. So what we've been able to do is create a chat GPT bot for any Bitcoiner out there who doesn't want to pay for our service. We give it away for free anyway. All of our IP is up there. You can use our IP and our knowledge, our experience to improve your own self-custody setup. I want to make sure that every Bitcoiner here now has the best self-custody setup that they can. And this is why we share all of our IP for free. If you don't want to work with us and pay our fee, that's okay too. We just ask that if you want us to do the work with you, you pay us, and we think that's a fair trade-off. We want to make sure that every Bitcoiner wins. So we're not fussed on the fee. We've got hundreds of clients globally who love what we do. What you can expect when you work with us is really simple. The first thing that we do is we remove every single point of failure from your self-custody setup so that regardless of what you do with your keys and the rest of it, you cannot lose your Bitcoin. And most importantly, that your loved ones are going to be able to recover your Bitcoin in the event that you're not there. Once that has been delivered on, and it's not trust me, bro, we actually show you how we do it so not only you but your wife and your family can get comfortable with it. Once we've proven that unlocks a little thing in a Bitcoiner's mind, and most importantly in the family's mind, that now they can add more capital to this asset class. And that's where the real value of the service comes in, that the 1% is relatively cheap if we can help increase your stack. And that's where for the last, I guess, close to 10 years now, I've been working with clients to find every spare bit of capital to put into this. And once you remove the risk of losing your Bitcoin, then the ability to add to it is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent question, and by the way, I didn't mean to phrase that in a way of like you shouldn't be charging a fee. I meant to phrase it in a way of like, what are people getting into return? What are people getting in return? And I just kind of want to go scroll down. You have this very cool kind of like presentation on your guys' website, and it does like the comparison. So kind of want to show that on screen right now. And it just breaks everything down. So here's the Bitcoin advisor. There's self-custody. There's the Bitcoin ETF, which I think is the biggest scam out of all this. That's my personal opinion. And then of course the exchanges. So you guys offer advice, Bitcoin concierge service. What does that mean? Bitcoin concierge service.
It's really a hand-holding service for someone who's completely new to Bitcoin. That means helping you get your exchange set up, helping you set up your wallet, your cold card, your hardware device, whatever that might be, setting up your vaults. And it's an all-inclusive white glove service that takes someone through start to finish of not only purchasing Bitcoin, but securing that as well.
Okay. And then Bitcoin escape, Bitcoin estate planning protocol, built-in redundancy, collaborative custody. What do you mean by collaborative custody? What does that entail?
That involves using multiple parties to secure your Bitcoin. So the client sets up an account with a software provider, whether that's Unchained, Thea, Keeper, Nunchuck. They're all fantastic services out there. They own the account, and typically that service provider holds a key. The client holds a key, and then we hold a default backup key in the event that they're unable to recover their own key. And what that collaborative custody allows us to do is that allows us to remove every single point of failure from the client's self-custody setup.
Gotcha. And let me ask you something too. Is a 2 of 3, the client holds 2 of the keys, you guys own 1 of the key? Is it where 2 separate custodians hold the 2 keys, and the client owns 1 key? What's the breakdown there?
Typically, it's a tri-party. So the client holds a key, the client owns the account with the software provider who holds a key for them, and we hold a default backup key. So it's effectively 3 key holders, and that is one of the keys that allows us to avoid any single point of failure. And one of the things that I'm really proud to sort of share with you is that we've had 3 clients, sadly, who have passed away. And the reason why we were able to recover their Bitcoin is because they had that in that collaborative custody setup, and we were able to co-sign transactions subject to meeting all of the legal requirements on that transaction. We were able to sign and move the Bitcoin to wherever it needed to be for the recipients.
Gotcha. And it was all, they set everything up beforehand to make sure that, that's the will. This is what you need to hit up Peter, and he'll take care of you. So stuff like that. Very, very cool. Big fan. I think, as time progresses, Bitcoin services are just going to continue to be needed as more and more people adopt Bitcoin, because it's the best money the world has ever seen. Peter, absolutely blow my mind every single time you come on Simply Bitcoin. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to see you.